everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're doing things a little bit different today, but we are continuing on with our craft fair series for 2023. We are going to make a little box to hold a package of these Kleenex. I purchased these at Dollar Tree for $1.25 for 8 of them. And I am going to put these in my craft fair. The packaging on these isn't terrible, to be honest with you. But we're going to do something to kind of jazz it up. So my inspiration for this project today came from Crafty Crafts by Deena. She is also here on YouTube. She makes paper, crafts, and then she also does like sewing. I can't sew a straight line to save my soul, so those ones are not for me. But this one I really liked, and it's pretty simple to do. So the first thing we're going to do is I have a piece of Paper Studio, just plain cardstock here. This is not a super heavy weight, but neither does it have to be because it's not holding anything super heavy. So this piece of paper measures 6.5 by 8. And so on the long side of this, we are going to score it at 2 1/4. We're going to score it at 3 1/4. At 5 1/2 and at 6 1/2. Then you're going to rotate it and you're going to score at 1. This is the short side, so this is the 6.5 inch side. You're going to score it at 1 and at 6 1/2. Or if you wanted to, if you weren't really trusting in your measuring and cutting skills, you can just score it at 1, rotate it 180 degrees and score it at 1 again. So that is all the scoring for this project. When I score either designer series paper or a paper that is a thinner weight, I use the thicker ball tip on my stylus here. This stylus I have had for probably darn near 20 years. It's starting to croak a little bit, but Dollar Tree actually has styluses, and it's actually pretty cute. In fact, I have one right here. And it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, those diameters look pretty much identical. So when this one finally bites the dust, I've got a backup. So anyway, that's all the scoring done. So now what we're going to do is we are just going to burnish. And all that means is you fold the paper on itself and you press down. This is a lighter weight. Cardstock, like I said, it's probably 65 pounds, so it's not like super heavyweight. So I'm not pushing incredibly hard when I burnish this down, but I am just trying to get a good crease. Now, when I burnish this down, I am trying to make sure that my paper is lined up, so that my box comes together a little bit nicer. So if you can see there, it wants to, how I'm laying it down, it wants to have a little gap there. I'm just kind of forcing it and coaxing it to go to where it's even. So we're just going to burnish all 4 of these sides. For the closure on today's project, Deena did some seam binding ribbon, and I am going to use seam binding ribbon also. You can use regular ribbon. You can use magnet closures for this, but you can use Velcro dots. You could use a belly band. There's several options that you could do as far as closing this, or you could leave it open if you didn't want to bother with a closure at all. That's totally an option also, but I am going to use some seam binding ribbon, and I will tell you who I purchased that from when I remember. So you could always do this base from pattern paper and just let the pattern paper take the show, maybe put an embellishment or something on there. But I chose to kind of use some of my cardstock. I have oodles of Paper Studio, just plain cardstock, so I decided to use that. So with that being said, I do want to mat it and make it look a little extra fancy. So to mat this, we've got, let me look at my measurements, folks, because there's quite a few numbers here. You don't have to mat this as much as I have or as Miss Deena did. As much matting as you want to do is totally up to you. But if you want to mat this how I'm going to mat this, this is what you're going to need. You are going to need 2 pieces, okay? This is going to be the front and the back of your box. You need 2 pieces that measure 2 by 4 1/4. And folks, I will put all of the measurements down in the description box below, because I know when I'm trying to follow tutorials, sometimes the creator talks super duper fast and I can't catch it. So I appreciate when they put dimensions and measurements in the description box. So I will do that for you today. Like I said, you need 2, and this is going to be the front and the back of your box, that measure 2 by 4 1/4. Then you need 2 that measure, this is going to be the top and the bottom. You need 2 that measure 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 for your top and bottom. For the flap, you need one that measures, for the top flap, one that measures 4 1/4 by 1 3/8. Okay. And then if you do want to mat the sides, which I was halfway tempted not to even bother with that, but again, I'm trying to kind of use some scraps that I have. So if to measure and to, mat the sides of your box, you need 2 that measure 2 by 3/4. So if you have a paper that has a direction, make sure that your 4 1/4 measurement is up and down, so facing the right way, so that you can have things line up and you're not looking at things upside down or crooked and sideways. So if you notice, you have a larger flap here, and then you have a smaller flap. This is the flap that is going to go over the box. So this is a flap that is going to open and close. So how we're going to treat this one is I'm going to cut straight and stop at this first horizontal line. I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay. So we're just cutting, I'm cutting to the right of this score mark I made. Okay. So I'm going to cut, and I'm going to actually miter. So all that means is instead of cutting straight, I'm going to cut at an angle. Okay. So I'm just going to cut at an angle and meet up that mark. So if you notice, we just cut at an angle to remove that score mark. Okay. Then again, we're going to cut at an angle one more time. And then I'm going to cut straight again to the right of that score mark just to remove it. Okay. So we're taking that little section off right there. So that gives us this kind of look. Okay. We're going to repeat that on this other side. So I'm going to miter to meet this edge. Then I'm going to miter on this rectangle, and I'm going to, the square, and I'm going to cut straight down this rectangle. Okay. So this is what we get. Okay. These don't have to be as big as they are. So this will just kind of help keep the box from or the lid from kind of caving in and going in. So I'm just going to reduce those by half. If you wanted to be very specific, you could put them in your paper trimmer and reduce them. They're at 1 inch wide, but just eyeballing it works sufficient for me. So again, we're on these side flaps. I'm going to cut straight down the rectangle on both sides. On this side, I'm cutting to the left. On this side, I'm cutting to the right of that score mark. And I'm going to miter in again on these squares. Okay. We're going to remove that. Okay. Now we're going to repeat that on this side. So straight on the rectangle, straight on the rectangle, and miter into that square just a touch. You don't have to do a heavy miter, but you want to miter it just a little bit. The reason why we miter, if you're new to making 3D projects, is anything that folds into the box is going to add bulk. So in order to kind of take out some of that bulk, if you miter, the box just kind of goes together a little bit easier. So this is kind of giving you a taste on how this box is going to come together. Okay. So that's about how it's going to come together. Now, one of the things that I liked about her project that kind of made it have a much nicer finish is she rounded these corners here. So I have a little crocodile corner rounder here. It has a 1/4 inch side, and it also has a 1/2 inch side. I'm going to try the 1/4 inch side and see what I think. I think that'll be good. I think we're going to stick with the 1/4 inch side. So because we rounded the corners on this flap, we need to round the corners on what is going to actually be the flap for our box. So my paper kind of sort of has a direction. If you didn't line it up right, it wouldn't really matter. But it does kind of sort of have a direction. So I'm going to mat these 2 bottom corners on this pattern paper. And I'm going to use the same 1/4 inch rounder. Okay, so this is going to go like that. Let's get this scoreboard out of the way. We are done with that. So let's scoot that out of the way. All right, so this one's going to go here. This is for our flap. And then we've got, this is for the bottom. This is for the top. These are going to be for the sides. We'll get to that in a second. And I believe that one needs to go that way, and that one needs to go that way. So this kind of gives you an idea of where these papers are going to lie. Now, if you're going to use a ribbon closure, my mind just went blank, a ribbon closure or a seam binding ribbon closure, anything like that, you want to be sure to add that ribbon before you mat it. Now, if you're doing a belly band, Velcro dots, magnets, that kind of thing, that's not important. The order of that is not important. But if you are going to use a ribbon or a seam binding ribbon, something along those lines, twine, what have you, then you want to make sure that you put that down before you mat it. So I have some seam binding ribbon here. If you don't stretch it out, it's about 20 inches long. If you do stretch it out, it's probably closer to 23, 24 inches long. And that's what I'm going to use to close this. So all I've done is applied a strip of double-sided tape. I purchased this tape off of Amazon, but there's tons of it out there. You could even use like a tape runner if you wanted to. And all I've done is, this is the flap and this is the bottom. You don't want any tape or the ribbon to go on the bottom. You all want it to be on what is actually the bottom of the card, so or of the box. So when it sits on the table, it's the bottom, and then up toward the flap. That's the only places that you want your tape, so ergo your ribbon, to go. I wouldn't recommend using like a wet adhesive, just because if you are using a thinner ribbon or this seam binding ribbon, it's kind of, for lack of better words, holey. Like it's not. You'll see the adhesive, and that just won't be as cute. So I'm going to try to get this as even as possible, and I am kind of stretching it pretty decently hard. This is probably an excessive amount of ribbon, just to be honest with you, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. So I just try to kind of get that centered. When you roll up the box, it's not going to be as visible. So again, if you want to add a ribbon closure, you need to do this before you mat it. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wet adhesive and I'm going to go ahead and mat this while it's flat. I normally put the box together before I mat, but we're gonna live wildly today, and we're gonna mat while it's flat. We're gonna be wild, folks. So I'm just gonna get all of this matted, and we will move on. Okay, so this is it, completely matted. So the next thing I want to do, well, it's completely matted minus the sides, and I wanted to show you the sides. So to get a cleaner, nicer finished product, you want to have your seam toward the back. So let me show you what I mean by that. So this is my flap, and this is going to be the front, and this is the flap that folds over. So all I'm going to do, these little squares that we mitered, I'm going to tuck those in, and I'm going to fold up this flap that doesn't have any ribbon on it, and I'm going to fold it up this way. Okay, so this now becomes the very back of your box. And the reason why this is the back is not only do we have the flap on the front, but when we glue this down, this seam, this loose end, is facing toward the back, so that you have a nice finished product on the front. I hope that makes sense. So I am going to go ahead and glue these down. And I think I'm going to try to use my kind of fine tip bottle here. I purchased these on Hobby Lobby. I was just having a lot of trouble with my other fine tip nozzle just kind of locking up on me all the time, and it was getting kind of old. And I am going to add just a little bit of adhesive to this little rectangle in here too. I'm going to fold that one in, then the back, and now the front. And that is going to give you this nice tight edge. And I'm going to set this down on my desk just to make sure I've got kind of a hard surface to give me a level surface. I'm just going to let that adhere, and then we will do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to open this up a little bit. We're going to put a little adhesive on this rectangle. This is the front flap because this is where we have no closure, or a ribbon. And then I'm going to put some adhesive on the back. Okay. And then I'm going to fold the front over and again set it down on my desk just to make sure we've got it kind of even so it doesn't wiggle and wobble when we set it down or have it in our table for display. Making sure that this lines up and is even along the back also. And now your little tabs tuck in, and then you can close it. So let's go ahead and mat these. You don't have to mat those if you didn't want to. If you just got tired of cutting a whole bunch of paper, you didn't have to mat them. But I chose to kind of work through my scraps, and I just recently purchased a bunch of new Paper Studio paper, and so I need to kind of work through what I've got. So if you've got like a lot of, I know that I have like favorite papers from paper pads, and so I end up having papers that are just kind of what I would use for like a liner or an accent. They wouldn't necessarily be like my main focus, and so then I get a lot of like papers like that. So this is a good project to kind of try to use some of those if you've got them. All right, so that is our box all done. Here is one of our little tissues. They fit perfectly inside. Tuck in the sides, your little tabs, and then you can tie it off. I am not like the best at making bows. I get better, but I'm not the best. The good thing is that this like seam binding ribbon type material is very, very forgiving as far as like bows are concerned. It is extremely forgiving. So that's not too shabby. All right. So there is your little box. Tighten that off a little bit. You can seal these edges, but kind of the cute thing about seam binding ribbon is it's kind of rusticy. That's probably not even a word, but it's a word now. So you can seal these edges, but you absolutely don't have to. You could put sentiment on here, for you, thank you, what have you, whatever reason you're giving it to, giving it for. But I'm just going to let that cute pattern paper speak for itself. So that is all. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time, and we will see you next time. Bye.